Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. I'm Enima Chettiar, and I'm the director of the Justice Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. This panel is going to talk about the effects of incarceration, specifically on mothers and children. As you all heard earlier in the day, the female incarceration rate has skyrocketed by over 700% since 1980, with 60% of women in prison also having small children. Between missing mothers and missing fathers, there are 2.7 million children incarcerated. The effects on children and families are dramatic, and we have a distinguished panel of guests today to speak about that. I'm going to very briefly introduce each one of them. First, we have Cynthia Roseberry, who's the executive director of the Center for Court Excellence. She's a member of the Federal Colson Task Force and a founding member of the Georgia Innocence Project. Then we have Topeka Sam, who's the founder of the Ladies of Hope Ministries, which works to empower women in the criminal justice system. She's a member of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And then we have Georgia Lerner, who's the executive director of the Women's Prison Association, where she works to reduce the number of women in prison. She previously worked to provide direct health care services. And finally, we have Judge Brenda Murray, who is the chief administrative law judge of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. She currently serves as co-chair of the Women in Prison Committee of the National Association of Women Judges. So I'm going to start off by asking each of our panelists a question and then open it to audience questions. Cynthia, can you tell us a little bit more about the scope of this problem and what really are the impacts on mothers and children of the incarceration system?
Sure. So when I think about the impact of incarcerated mothers on children, in a shameless self-plug, the Council for Court Excellence did a report called Beyond Second Chances, in which we address the specific reentry issues for women. But one of the things that happened when we interviewed women was that a woman said something very profound that I thought was profound. She said, when you go to prison, they don't allow you to go home and deal with your children before they take you out. So imagine that a mother is just disappeared from her children. And when we think about the stigma that's attached to those who are incarcerated, it's exponentially more for women. So that transfers to the children of those women. And in many instances, the studies show that children aren't even told that their mothers are incarcerated. So that mother is snatched away from that child, and the child has no idea that the mother's gone.
Thank you. So Topeka, can you talk a little bit about your personal experience and also what's being done to address some of the challenges?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here and having us here as the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. Our mission is to end the incarceration of women and girls, and we feel that there should be no woman in prison or girl at all, and that the issues need to be addressed, the violence, the trauma, and the things that are done systemically and primarily to women and people of color. So through my experience, and I just want to start by saying I am currently incarcerated, and when I say that, I did 3 years in the federal prison, six months in the federal halfway house, and currently the last 2 years plus under the surveillance of U.S. parole and probation. And so I am currently incarcerated. And so in the work as a national organizer and going all over the country to meeting other women, I can talk to you about, my experience of being incarcerated, but I'm not a mother, and what we do at the National Council, earlier we talked about, and you even heard Senator Booker talk about making sure that the voices are up front in the work. And so our mantra is nothing about us without us, right? And, we don't have a lot of time because I would have rather ceded my time over to Kendia Riley, who is here, who is the daughter of incarcerated parents. Both of her parents were incarcerated for life sentences when she was just 2 years old. And she could speak to, and maybe during Q&A, it might be a time that she'll be able to speak to her experiences as a child of an incarcerated parent and what actually happens to those children. And we have Miyoshi, who some of you may have heard from her from the Women in Justice Project earlier, who actually had a child while shackled in prison. And what happened to her children would be something that she could potentially share also, right? So through the experiences that we have, we tried to create platforms and utilize the platforms to allow women and girls to utilize their voice from firsthand. That's some of the work that we're doing. Because as a national organizer, it does not do any justice to the work or even the work that's being done here today for me to speak about that particular issue when we have sisters in the room that could speak about that for themselves. So I would just like to leave that there with them.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Georgia, can you talk a little bit about some of the more effective alternatives?
Sure. So we've all heard about different alternatives to incarceration: specialty courts, mental health courts, drug treatment courts. And I think that these things are all very helpful in terms of keeping women and men and children really out of prison. I think that when we think about alternatives, it's more than talking about alternatives to incarceration. We really need to step back and look at why are we responding to crime in the first place, right? There's been a breach of public safety. So if the goal of responding to crime is to acknowledge that somebody has broken that public trust or violated it, and that we're trying to restore public safety, we should just acknowledge that prisons and jails don't work, right? They are not making us more safe. And I don't think it's their mandate to make us more safe. They have a completely separate mission. They're supposed to keep people, just safe and contained while they're being disappeared from our communities. But if we think about trying to promote public safety, we actually have a lot of great tools at our disposal. And when I heard Kamala Harris talking about being smart on crime, I thought, right, being smart on crime means preventing crime. And the way that we can prevent crime is by strengthening families and by understanding why individuals who have been caught up in the criminal system are committing crime, understanding what those factors are, and directly addressing the reasons that people are committing crime. And we know that men and women commit crimes for, in some cases, similar reasons, but there are differences. For women, mental illness, prior trauma, unsafe housing, and parental stress are major risk factors that are not issues for men. They do not predict risk of men committing crime. But if you think about those things, parental stress, unsafe housing, trauma, those are not things that get better or go away when we send people to prison or jail. Those are settings where we really can't address those things. And I would propose that working with people in the real settings where they have to live their everyday lives is the right place to help people address the underlying risk factors. And then when we're helping a woman address parental stress, which is helping her become more competent and confident and capable in her daily struggle and, hopefully some joy eventually of parenting, we actually strengthen that whole family and by extension strengthen communities. And we can stop using prison as a first resort and really need prisons and jails much less often than we use them now.
Thank you. So Judge Murray, everyone's here talking about the need to end the mass incarceration of women. Why hasn't that happened yet?
It's happened because nobody gives a damn. Let me just say two things. One, the government agency that I work with has nothing to do with these remarks. I didn't want that mentioned that I work for the federal government, but you can't, they're not responsible for what I've said. This is annual leave for me, okay? Second thing.
Oh, good.
That little lady in the back of the room there, Pauline Sullivan, who's a co-founder of CURE, Citizens United for the Rehabilitation of Errants. Only an ex-priest and ex-nun could come up with that title. But anyway, Charlie and Pauline have done more for women and men in prison than anybody else in this building. Okay, now in response to the question, somebody asked me about Booker's bill, okay? And this is my remarks. You are in a different universe. I cannot even get the Maryland Women's Legislative Caucus upset about the fact that Maryland, the women confined at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women, about 750 women, mainly from Baltimore, are not being allowed to touch their children or grandchildren during visits. only once when the visit is over. If a kid crawls on the woman's lap, she gets a demerit, okay? The women really, because I run a book club, the women recently told me that the drug treatment's been eliminated, and they're advised to read books by Rick Warren. We did manage to get one visiting day restored. It's now 3. We volunteers equipped a computer lab, but it's not used most nights I'm there. Few women have jobs. It is not cruel and unusual punishment, but it is sad and wasteful. I've met Mr. Moyer, the director of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. He does not know the slightest thing about gender equality and will not listen to anyone who does. Maybe you can get legislators interested in the subject, but we've not been able to do so. And I'm talking now about the National Association of Women Judges, which is a national organization of about 1,400 women. There's some of us who deeply care, and we've cared about this since 1993 when we discovered that women are getting the shaft in incarceration in criminal justice. I can't tell you that all the women in NAWJ are interested, but there are some of us. I'm only here today because our big shot woman is on vacation at the beach. So she asked me to do this. But we have some big shots that are interested, and they can get us meetings with the Assistant Attorney General. They don't listen to us. They give us the meeting. So why is this problem? Because people like you and me, we don't do enough. And other people really don't give a damn. And they're not going to give a damn tomorrow either. I'm sorry. Okay.
So do you have thoughts on how to help make people give a damn?
I wish I could. The Attorney General has just fired the person that Obama put in that was going to revamp education in the federal prisons. Just fired. They tell me she was a good person, had a lot of plans. Oi.
That was the Attorney General.
Huffington Post.
Okay, so we're going to open it to audience questions. Oh, Nikichi.
I just would like to hear from one or two of the people that Topeka had mentioned they have personal experience in time of incarcerated parents.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Oh, thank you.
That would be helpful.
Oh, Linda, take the phone.
So, oh, wow, okay. My name's Kendi O'Reilly,
Come right up.
Yeah,
and I'm up. So,
sit down. Yep.
my name's Kendi O'Reilly. So both of my parents were convicted and given life sentences when I was 2 years old. So both my parents are still currently incarcerated. But I think it was fun looking at the pamphlet and seeing everybody that's kind of up here, and then wondering like, oh, so like who's a mom? Or hearing Topeka say, I'm not a mother, but I was formerly incarcerated. Or looking and saying, okay, well, who has a child that's incarcerated? Because it's really dichotomously analogous when you look at how, like, a mom in prison looking at her children is completely different from the child's aspect too. So when it's like, oh, like what's like, and I'm sure Mayoshi can speak on that, when it comes down to it, the way I went through things and what happened when they both went to prison is completely different from how she felt, because she's on the inside going through conditions that are just unfathomable, and it's like I'm on the outside trying to live my life too. And I think the main thing that happens when mothers go to prison specifically is it forces their children to become adults. And I could probably say I grew up underneath my grandparents, but I could say probably from the age of 13 or 14, I was automatically pushed to act as if I was like 18 or 19. And now I'm 20, so I'm not that old still. But it's interesting because I automatically became the exception to all the other children that were like me. And we get put into this subset. It's kind of like another category because we're stigmatized as well. And just like you said, even in a report where we're not told. I grew up underneath my grandparents, and they told me that my parents were in the military, they worked for the government. When they would call, it was automatically, oh, this is a call from a federal prison. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And she said, oh, they're on a secret mission, and I'm this gullible kid. But at the end of the day, the only way I found out was through going to school and kids teasing me. And the automatic stigma that came with your like parents going to prison, it was, oh, they murdered someone, or they were robbing stores, and automatically I became this target where the one thing that I did go to escape from all of it was school. So now my personal life was brought into my educational life, so I started acting out in school. And then all of a sudden I had behavioral issues, and nobody sat down and asked me why. So once asked why, I thought if I did the worst things I possibly could, I literally told the dean of my students when he's like, why are you doing all this stuff? I said, oh, well, I want to be with my parents. So if I get enough trouble, I'm going to be with my parents. And I had to have, at the age of, I was probably about 6 or 7, a police officer sit down and tell me, no, you're going to go to juvenile detention. You're not going to be with your parents in a federal prison. And I couldn't understand that, and I thought, wow, being a child in that position with somebody able to sit down and ask me what is wrong, why are you doing it? How many other children are there in the world with parents in prison that don't have anybody at all, or just don't have anybody to ask them what's wrong or what can they do? And it was automatically this thing where you're going to go to juvenile detention, or it was, oh, let's place her in special ed because she has behavioral issues anyway. So now we have an issue of displacing the children. So our community is automatically just kind of displaced anyway. And we have the children like me who I'm studying chemistry at the University of Virginia now. So I'm automatically she went and got her education. She did better for herself. So I'm the exception to every other child that's like me, because everybody else is automatically put into this generational platform where they're supposed to go to prison just like their parents too. And they settle because they think it's okay because that's all they know. And everybody knows, you look up to your parents as your role models. So and when I look at my mom and dad in prison and I think, well, maybe this is all I can amount to, it automatically puts me into this mindset where it's like, well, maybe I do belong in prison. Maybe I'm not worth it. When I look at the judge or anybody that convicted my parents, it makes me look at them and think, well, maybe I'm worthless because they didn't consider me when they were actually convicting my parents. So looking at that, it's like, okay, so now for me, being capable to actually speak and communicate with my parents, it put me in a position where I had to, and Andrea James spoke on it earlier, and she said that it's practically impossible to parent through a telephone call, and the rates of being on the phone is ridiculous. So it's $1 for a minute of a conversation, $2 for 3 minutes, and then but I actually heard it's $3.75 now for 15 minutes of a phone call, and then my parents only get 300 minutes a month. My mom, she's in a lower security prison, so I can visit her more willingly, but just like you said, there's no touching. My dad's facility, the last visit I had, we literally touched hands like this, and the guards separated us and pushed him back from us. So there's no touching, there's no hugging, there's no type of intimacy. Your parents sit across from you. There's no sitting beside each other, laughing, eating together. If you want to buy something for them from a vending machine, they can't touch the money you have. They can't get up. And then with my father, he still has a life sentence. So mind you, he's there, and basically that's practically his grave. So at the end of the day, he has 360 days in a year, and out of all those days, he can only have 60 to have visits. So 5 visits a month is literally his max. So if I go, he has 4 or 5 other children. So if they want to go visit too, it's like we all have to conjoin and make the visit together, or I go see him one day and then we divide up the days. So now at this point, I'm only seeing him once a month, and that's 12 times a year throughout a whole entire life sentence. And I think that it's ridiculous, and it's really an inconsolable feeling. And to be a child of someone and to ask the question, what is happening to us? It's kind of like we're sinking, and we're constantly in a numb state of sinking and just being kind of underneath the water all the time. with no one to kind of lift us up because nobody understands the problem and nobody's actually sitting and considering how we feel. But as a mother, I can only imagine how you can sit behind a prison wall and actually try to reach out and be a mother through a telephone. So I don't know how my mom feels sometimes. Most of the time it's exasperating to talk on the phone because at the end of the telephone call, and it's like at the end of the call with either my mom or my dad, it's literally to the point where we're laughing, to the point where we're crying because we've heard the beep to let us know the time is almost up. And at that point, it's like we're laughing, we're crying, and by the time the phone, like the call is over, it's exasperating. And you're sitting there thinking, wow, like, what do I do? Or I can't talk about everything that happens in my life. And then it's like the phone call becomes so burdening because it's like, I can only get 15 minutes of your time. And then you can continuously call as much as you want, but once 300 minutes of your time is up, I'm on my own. And it's like, I can't contact you, or the only contact I have is email. And then the prisons are so far away that there's no way to get to a prison. So, and my dad's in Pennsylvania and I'm in Virginia. So that's practically impossible to go to. And then to have 3 visits on the weekend, Monday through Friday, with a certain time frame. And if you miss a certain time, they'll dismiss you and tell you can't come in. So it's literally so many stipulations where I always say, when people say, well, formerly incarcerated, or somebody like an person that is incarcerated, like Topeka said, I'm incarcerated too. So.
I know some of the women at Jessup, which is the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women, when they go for a visit and when they come back, they have to squat in front of guards to show that they don't have any drugs or anything. And some of them will not go through that humiliating experience, so they won't have their families come to visit them.
It's not even a female person that is.
The guards are mixed. There's some male, there's some female.
Hello, everyone. My name is Miyoshi Benton. It's hard to even have a conversation about what it feels like to be a mom inside when you have children on the outside. It's a feeling that you cannot explain. It's heart-wrenching. I had a 1-year-old at the time, and I was also pregnant. I was 2 months pregnant at the time of my arrest. And being ripped from your children and not knowing when you will ever be able to see them, touch them, love them, nurture them, hold them, embrace them, be there for them, is one of those things that's like inhumane. Like, why would you, as a society, why would we as a country want that for anyone? Like, why would we want childless, like children without parents? Like, why aren't we doing more to try to fix this crazy system that we live in, the criminal justice system that constantly rips children from their moms? Why don't we keep mothers in the communities? If we know that mothers are the cornerstones of their communities, if we know that they are the primary caregivers for that family and that are the only one that's bringing in the money to provide for their children, then why do we feel like it's okay to rip them from their homes? After having my baby, I had my baby in prison, and giving birth in prison is another traumatizing experience, and I spoke about it a little earlier, which I won't really touch on right now, but to speak more to, like, having to send my daughter home after already leaving my son behind was the worst day of my life. Like, that was the one day that my son decided to grab me around my neck and told me that he never wanted to let me go. Like, you don't understand the effects that it have, and it's more emotional, psychological, and these are the traumatizing effects that incarceration have on mothers. These are the traumatizing effects that incarceration have on children, and you live with this day in, day out, and you fight hard because you know you behind bars, and you know that the criminal justice system puts barriers in place to stop you from parenting, to isolate you from the public, from society, from, you know, the eyes that can see what is going on. And as mothers, it's our job, and we fight hard to create some kind of bond, which is really, really hard to do because phone calls. I was in Pennsylvania at one point, and a phone call for maybe 5 minutes was $25. Like, it's astronomical. And then if we're talking about how much they actually pay women while they're working in these facilities, you're getting paid 9 cents an hour, 16 cents an hour to work all day, and then you have to choose whether you want to use that to call home, to buy stamps, or to buy sanitary napkins, or like human basic need that you don't get from the correctional facilities. It's constantly a struggle, and there's like facilities that have glass. There's facilities that have monitors, and I had to go through that in certain facilities where there is no such thing as an opportunity to even reach across the table and touch your child because it's a glass and it's a phone. And the children don't understand. They don't understand why they can't be on the other side of that glass with their mom. And like you mentioned, like being strip searched, you are strip searched, and it's humiliating and it's horrible. And I was pregnant and being strip searched, and you gotta squat and cough, and it's like just to go and see your family, just to go and to see your child, but you do it anyway because it's your job and you love them and you have to do whatever it takes to create that bond. And you don't want that bond to be broken because at the end of the day, they're out in the real world without the guidance, without the love that they need to actually nourish and flourish and to be as like their best self. And it's just a horrific experience all the way around. Prison is just the criminal justice system that we have to reimagine. We have to think about rehabilitation in a different way. It has to be accountability. It has to be healing. It has to be some kind of transformation, and it cannot be the criminal justice system we have. We cannot be ripping homes. We cannot be ripping these communities. And it's what we need to realize is it's who are the people that we're ripping from these homes. It's
Can I just interrupt because I think we need some questions from the audience, but I would comment on one thing you said. We had at MCIW a woman write about an experience meeting her grandchild for the first time, and we got it published in the Washington Post. Hundreds of awful letters to the Post of how despicable this woman was because she would deserve to be incarcerated. She shouldn't have anything to do with her grandchild. And so you all are a sympathetic audience, but let me tell you, this is not the real world. The world out there does not want these women to have anything to do with their kids. So, it would be good to get some discussion going. It's fascinating to listen to you, and I know what you're talking about, but you all should talk and ask us questions. What the hell is going to come out of this meeting? I mean, you've all had a nice lunch. Now, where do we go from here?
Is there anything you just want to add at the end, and then we can switch over?
I'm sorry.
No, really fast. I just wanted to say that we don't value these women that we're sending away. It's women of color. It's low-income communities. So if we don't value them in society, how are we going to value them behind, the bars?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just came last night from a meeting where we're trying to pass the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. And to your point, Judge Murray, we're dealing with some power dynamics that are, as Tamar knows, having, put her heart and soul into this for like 6 years. We're working with some power dynamics that are very distressing and dismaying. And we have to push until the political pressure to do the right thing is stronger than the racism, the sexism, the hatred, really it's hatred, the contempt for the people that they don't care about. We have to, each one of us, organize. We have to, each one of us, push that these people hear from their voters that it's unacceptable. And yes, you're going to get the letters, okay. But then who has the responsibility to educate each person who's talking that way? And I'd love to hear from the panel what your thoughts are. I know you're out there doing amazing work. There have been some amazing victories. New York has this incredible law, the strongest in the nation, that there was some question whether the governor was going to sign it. There was some pushback. But he heard from Lord knows how many phone calls, right? Because people said, no, this cannot continue. So it's on each and every one of us, and change has happened, and change can happen.
Anyone else?
I guess I was going to.
I'll call you in a second.
I have a couple things to say. I don't know if I have to stand up. Okay. Hi. I definitely think I can see where you're coming from, and I can see where you're coming from. I think with every issue that our country has had to face with racism, going all the way back to slavery, at one point the majority didn't give a damn. And we have to be organized, like she said, and we have to keep pushing, and we have to know what to do. Most of us are in positions where we help in our little way, but how can we organize together? What things can we do to push this as a unit, as a force? Because that happens, it just starts little by little and then it snowballs. So I think the biggest piece that everyone in here can take home is how can we organize together to make sure that these issues are pushed and not forgotten?
George, do you want to?
I think one of the sort of strange things that I notice is, I think our whole, I wouldn't really call it a criminal justice system, but our crime response system is based on this notion that we have to punish people. And even in my work at Women's Prison Association for the last 17 years, whenever something has happened where somebody has not followed the rules or someone has done something, that upset a staff member, the default is some kind of a consequence that, is a negative consequence that has no possibility of changing someone's behavior for the better. The research out there shows us that negative reinforcement does not change behavior, that multiple episodes of positive reinforcement change behavior. So if we can get enough policymakers, and not even beyond policymakers, if we can get district attorneys and judges to see that in each case, responding with a punitive reaction will cost more financially and also has almost no hope of bringing about a reduction in crime or changing that individual in the positive way that we are supposed to want people to change. I think we could take it even further. I think we just sort of throw people away if they've committed a crime, and that issues of racism, classism really influence it in a way, make it easier for us as a society to just make people disappear. But we're not doing anything to make ourselves safer. And all of the money that gets spent on psychological studies, why are we learning all of this if we're not going to put it to use? We could save a lot of money and save a lot of families if we just used what we know. We have all of the tools. I think one of the places we can push as individuals is if you're working, this is the choir here, right? Everybody here probably believes that we should stop sending so many people to prison. If you're in a situation where there's a case where the prosecutor isn't willing to make a deal or the judge isn't really willing to hear from you, push. And even if there isn't a program that particularly fits the circumstances, try to be creative and push to find a way to respond to that person's unique circumstances in a way that's actually going to help the person change their life. And I've been, surprised in cases where someone felt like they had to prosecute a case. But then if you spend the time and you really advocate, sometimes they're willing to do something different. I think a lot of people who are making the decisions don't know that they have choices. And sometimes we have to be creative and make the choices and, do it in each individual instance. So just push in each case. It's not just the big stuff, it's each individual.
I hate to quibble with you, but I think there is a big space where a group is not held accountable. And I think that is the folks who are the jailers. I personally have taken calls from clients who said, he's raped me again. So I think we need these stories. We need your stories. We need to know what's happening inside of our prisons. We don't know. And we need to hold them accountable for what's going on inside our prisons. We also need to hold our local district attorneys accountable for the tremendous amount of discretion they have. We need to hold our judges accountable. Judges need to care about the communities in which they preside. So my quibble with you is to agree with you that there is a certain group that's held accountable, but there's a much broader group that wields a mighty sword.
Absolutely.
And there's no accountability. And it's up to us because we pay their salaries through our tax dollars, and they affect our communities. So they need to be part of our communities, and we need to hold them accountable.
I would like to also add that what we're doing at the National Council is mobilizing and organizing incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls. And we see doing that through litigation, legislation, and grassroots advocacy. Right now, Andrea James, our executive director, started a bill, primary caretakers bill, and it's being sponsored in 4 different states right now. And it's to stop women who are, and men actually, primary caretakers of children from going to prison. And it gives, the rights to the prosecutors or the judges in order to do that, opposed to what the law may, state. So part of that is that. Another part of support would be to support organizations led by and of formerly incarcerated women and girls. Our organization, the National Council, we are led by and of formerly incarcerated women and girls. So the website is thecouncil.us. You can go on the website, you can join as an ally, as an incarcerated member, a formerly incarcerated member, a directly impacted community member. You can support the campaigns that we're pushing. Voting, for example, we're doing a Vote For Me campaign, which is going to empower formerly incarcerated people to run for public office where they can. Also, for those of us who cannot vote, then we'll register 10 other people who will vote in a way that we would. And how can you help us do that? You can mobilize and get people to the polls. You can bring these into these communities. You can help us go into the prisons where people can actually still vote because they're just on pretrial and they haven't been convicted. There's organizations that are doing that right now. And once we get the voting power back, then that's how things change, right? Because if we're looking at these, we talked about here, the district attorneys, we vote them in. Our politicians, we vote them in. It's the people that vote them in. So if we really want to see something different, then that's what we have to do as a community. And so we are starting political education so that we can educate each other within this space what we need to do. So support, you can go to the website. We'll keep you abreast of the things that's happening, and that's how you can get involved. And I heard someone earlier say about writing a check. You can write a check to us.
Thank you. Right there.
Hi, so just a question for you, Topeka. Can you speak more to your work in the Ladies of Hope Ministries and kind of how you tie in faith and all these different aspects into the work you do every day?
Okay, thank you. Well, the Ladies of Hope Ministries came from me being in prison. And for me, when I was going through my healing and my forgiveness process, because I realized that forgiveness was for me, in order for me to transform my life. And that redemption, for me, I got from my Creator, which is God. So as long as I know that I've gotten redeemed and I've forgiven myself, then I know that I can transcend that into the communities and people that I love and people, my people, which is all of you, right? So faith for me is the basis of everything. Hope for me is everything. If you're able to give someone hope, and that's what we do at the organization. We provide viable resources, working resources to say that, hey, because we've been incarcerated, we do know what's necessary. And there are great organizations that are out there, all over the country that are doing this work, to provide resources, but then somewhere there's a disconnect, right? Because then either people are going back to prison, there's no access to those resources. For me, when I came home, I came from a federal prison, and there were a lot of resources that I couldn't have because I was incarcerated in the federal system. And most of the programs, and I'm in New York, and most of the programs in New York focused on people who were coming from a New York system. So, it's thinking about how do you create those lines to offer the support to everyone. So I know that, when you think about all of the different substance misuse programs, AA and all these different programs, it's always speaking about something that is higher than yourself. And for me, once I realized that I had to be accountable to something higher than me, then it led my life in the way that it has, and has given me the ability to be able to do the work and to empower other sisters to be able to use their voice in spaces, and regardless, because we are the experts. Thank you.
Thank you. Right here.
Hello. I'm from the southwest side of Chicago, and I have seen lots of women around me that have had some shape or form of trauma. And I've also seen a lot of undocumented women, which I haven't really heard much about, that are in these private prisons that are affected by this, issues like this, and they're not even, they're ignored. But I'm a rising senior, and I hope to go to law school and become an immigration lawyer to address these problems. But my question is, how do I get to that position? Coming from humble beginnings, it's really difficult to find mentors, especially that look like me, that have come from the same beginning as me. So I guess my question would be, if any of you can answer, is how do I get to that position?
You work your ass off. I mean, a lot of us have. I mean, it's tough, but you just got to make up your mind and work towards it. And
I agree with that. I come from, I've been a criminal defense lawyer most of my life. I practiced mostly indigent defense, so I represented people who came from the communities like the one in which I was reared. I went to law school at night and worked during the day. I sought out mentors. I went to people who were doing what I wanted to do and said, "You are going to be my mentor." Most of them agreed. I connected with organizations that were doing the things that I wanted to do. And so let's connect after this, and I'm happy to. I know you have the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers sitting right next to you, right? Okay, but we can connect afterward too.
Yeah, and I'd also like to connect with you. I'm on the board of Grassroots Leadership, which is out of Austin, Texas, and the organization focuses specifically on immigration, detention. We have a lot of sisters who are in the National Council who are undocumented, and we partner up with different organizations that actually work toward that and keeping those sisters safe, and also being able to uplift them and using their voice. So I can connect you with some people also.
Thank you. So I think we have a couple minutes left, and we have a question in the back.
My name is Roberta Stanley. I'm an advocate for public education, and I heard part of the answer and part of your question. I just want to suggest to you that if you're attending an educational institution, you should take full advantage of the counseling staff and any of the teachers in a field that you might want to enter. There are a lot more intern programs. Some are paid, a lot more than used to be. Others are unpaid. There's a Washington Intern Center here in the city. And also a lot of legislators, both state legislators and federal legislators, have interns in their office. And it's a way to get your foot in the door. And as it was suggested by the panel, associations that you have an interest in. You go there and you offer to volunteer, whether it's the Democratic Party, social workers, schools, they'll be pleased to have you. And you may just work your way right into a paid slot, but you show a willingness, an openness, and a caring. We used to have like 5 or 6 interns in our office. I worked for a congressman, and I was the low person on the totem pole, so I got to supervise them. They're now lawyers, doctors, dentists, and very successful, and teachers all over the United States. But you can find a good heart. Thank you.
Okay, so I think time is, one more question?
Did you want to do one more?
Yeah, let's do one more question, sure.
I think I saw your hand first.
Okay, my question is, do you think that there are some things that that are being criminalized right now that cause people to go to prison? Not that because they're not actually committing crimes, it's just they're committing things that have been deemed to be crimes. And then, what are some things that we can, I guess, do to decriminalize some of these actions that some people are committing?
So I'll speak to the one thing that I think that's criminalized nowadays, and that is being Black.
Yes.
Which is the elephant in the room. And I think the way to decriminalize that is to engage with our police communities. We've got to change them, disrupt. That's what the young people now say. We have to disrupt the culture that's found in those organizations, in the district attorney's offices. I was listening to a radio show the other day, and a gentleman who represented prosecutors said that there are more Black people in prison because Black people commit most of the crimes. Right? And we all understand that's wrong. So, you know, being Black has been criminalized, and the way to decriminalize it is, you know, by engaging with people with whom we disagree. We have to continue to engage with folks and not keep on bowling shirts, the us and them. And I think that's how we begin to make a change in the cultures in those organizations.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. I think we got some fairly clear marching orders, but very broad, which is that we need to create more public pressure in order for anything to change. And we've heard a lot of different ways about how we can go about doing that. So thank you all, and thanks for everyone for sharing their stories, and to the audience as well.
Thank you.